seats because we're going to start in about 30 seconds. Thank you. And just to let you know, our first meeting is the special session that's budgeted for 5 minutes. And then we will begin the committee of the whole, hopefully at 5:35, which is 5 minutes from now. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting, special meeting of the Bloomington City Council to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Lauer,
Here.
Alderman Sage,
Here.
Alderman Malumboy,
Here.
Alderman Burgess,
Here.
Alderman Painter,
Here.
Alderman Schmidt, Alderman Black,
Here.
Alderman Hallman,
Here.
Alderman Fruin,
Here.
Mayor Renner.
Here. Thank you very much. And we do have two people for public comment, but it says committee of the whole rather than our special meeting. And that, again, will start in about 5 minutes. At this point, I want to go ahead and turn this over. We've got essentially a proposal here to allow possession of open alcohol on public property at the zoo to be held at the Miller Park Zoo. And is there a motion or questions or comments?
You looking for a motion?
Always.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Alderwoman Howman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Black. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Lauer,
Yes.
Alderman Sage,
Yes.
Alderman Malumboy,
Yes.
Alderman Burgess,
Yes.
Alderman Painter,
Yes.
Alderman Schmidt, Alderman Black,
Yes.
Alderman Hallman,
Yes.
Alderman Fruin.
Yes. Okay, motion carried. Is there a motion to adjourn the special meeting of the Bloomington City Council?
So moved.
Moved by Alderwoman Painter. Is there a second? Second by Alderman Lauer. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? We're adjourned? No? Let's see. I have 3 minutes. We're going to start our next meeting in 3 minutes. That was efficiency if I could ever see it. Okay. Scott looks like he wants it now. You're not Al Haig. You're not in charge here when somebody's
I
going.
believe Boca said he wanted to be the chair of that meeting.
We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Bloomington City Council Committee of the Whole to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Lauer,
Here.
Alderman Sage,
Here.
Alderman Malumboy,
Here.
Alderman Burgess,
Here.
Alderman Painter,
Here.
Alderman Schmidt. Alderman Black. Alderman Holman.
Here.
Alderman Fruin.
Here.
Mayor Renner.
Here. Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and start with public comment. We have two individuals, and you can speak up to 3 minutes apiece. We're going to start with Marty Seigel, and then we go on to Patricia Martin. Marty, would you please come forward? And if you'd sign in, please. Thank you. We know you, but if you'd sign in.
There's a pen, but no paper.
Oh, there's just a card. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry you had that. Go ahead.
Thank you. You're looking at $43 million in street repairs, and it really sounds good if you're in the central city and you know all the road problems. But the conditions of the streets are deplorable, we know that. But we do have a right to know that the money spent will be to enhance the central city and that none of it will be wasted on arbitrary decisions that will hurt our neighborhoods. Given our recent experiences with the Old East Side and along the Constitution Trail and along Linden Street, it's really very, very difficult to think that the city may spend this money wisely. Some in the city have decided to widen only one section of Linden Street, which is an expensive, unnecessary project that defies logic. If there's a good reason, neighbors have not been told what that reason might be. But given what we've seen in recent development along Linden, it now seems clear that widening Linden would give opportunities for additional, excessive development that will really hurt the neighborhood. It's not just a question of city wasting money on pet projects while essential services are ignored, although this is a piece of it. This is also a question of promoting a project that will undermine the neighborhood and cost residents on property values and enjoyment of life. We're really being asked here to finance our decline. Our money's being wasted. Our time is being wasted. It has taken an awful lot of work to just find out what the city is thinking of doing here. That's been a lot of work, unnecessary work for the neighbors. City staff time is wasted trying to justify a bad decision to neighbors while worthwhile projects are postponed or ignored. Inappropriate developments may add to the city sales tax, but they divide neighborhoods instead of bringing them together. They don't enhance the central city or invite people into the downtown. It will take some time for homeowner property values to reflect the negative impact of inappropriate development, but that will happen. And the central city will suffer, neighbors are going to lose. It will be much more fair to the neighborhood if the city, instead of undermining our neighborhood one step at a time, would just condemn the neighborhood and buy up our properties. And I really hate to say that, but it does feel like that is the direction we're going. This issue isn't just about one neighborhood. With the recent changes in code, the promise of more code changes, it's clear that many areas of town are going to be surprised by plans that bargain away their green space and harm their quality of life. And I sincerely hope the council will take steps to prevent that from happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Patricia Martin.
Okay, thank you. Now that election time is approaching rapidly, let us all be careful how we present ourselves. We do not want our city to undergo the problems that are occurring nationally, problems that appear to be both embarrassing and ridiculous. Despite issues with our roads, sidewalks, and public transportation, and I'd like to talk about the sidewalks sometime too, we have, after all, shown that we are capable of moving forward in positive directions with our continued emphasis on transparency, which is why I'm standing here, the strength of our law enforcement team, and with the county, our mental health initiative. It is important that we bond with other parts of our county in positive ways, as long as they are amenable and do not counter our needs. Otherwise, we should not. The mental health initiative most definitely is a major and necessary connection, as mental health can be the core of many of our problems. And Tom Barr's statement at a health committee meeting some time ago regarding developing awareness toward colleagues, not just strangers, made a big impact on me, and I'm sure on others as well. As I said last week, I'm most grateful about your approach to my personal concerns via the proclamation on elder abuse that you put forth. For such a proclamation can also benefit countless other citizens in our community, and this makes me proud, for we are now supporting a state and national initiative as well. This weekend, I received a letter from the Elder Justice Coalition in Washington, I'm also a member, stating that a new law regarding financial elder abuse, quote, comprehensive and meaningful, unquote, was just passed by the Senate Judiciary Committee, actually just this weekend. Our people in Springfield are also working in this area, so let us please continue along these lines too, with as few lapses as possible, and I will certainly offer my support. After all, why can't we be a model for other cities? And I must particularly commend our mayor for having the tenacity to pull this proclamation through. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have consideration of Committee of the Whole minutes of August 15th, 2016. Is there either a motion or corrections? A motion? or
I'll make a
corrections?
motion, we approve as presented.
Okay, thank you. Moved by Alderman Black. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Painter. Any discussion? I'm going to do this by voice vote, correct? Let's go ahead, call the roll then. All right, sorry.
Alderman Lauer.
Yes.
Alderman Sage.
Yes.
Alderman Lomoy.
Yes.
Alderman Burgess.
Yes.
Alderman Painter.
Yes.
Alderman Schmidt. Alderman Black.
Yes.
Alderman Hallman.
Yes.
And Alderman Troen.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, we're going to shift here to presentation of streets and sidewalks portion of the 5-year capital improvement plan. And we have presentation by our city manager and Mr. Jim Karch, our director of public works. And that's about 20 minutes, and then we have approximately 40 minutes then budgeted for council discussion on this matter. And I understand, Mr. Karch, you'd like to handle it essentially simultaneously rather than sequentially.
Yes, Mayor. I think City Manager has a couple comments to start us off, and then I'll explain, just tried a little bit unconventional tonight for us to have some better dialogue, possibly.
Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to mention to you that one document or a set of documents you received tonight was individual project data sheets that kind of go along with this particular section in the 5-year CIP. Each of the major projects should eventually occupy one of these project data sheets. However, they just weren't all available at one time. In fact, they're still in the process, some of them, of preparation, just because of lack of personnel and time. And you may not necessarily always get the full 5 years. I think that's the case with tonight's. It has had several years, but eventually, for every for the 5-year period, eventually you'll get this piece of detailed information, not only helping to describe the project, providing justification, why is it considered necessary, why is there the need, how did we necessarily justify it in making it a high priority, and then also showing where would be some of the local sources of funding, especially if there's multiple sources or more than one. Also on each of these sheets, similar to what you have in the summary, it'll be designated whether or not it appears to have a funding source, such as the local motor fuel tax or some other source, or if it appears to be an unfunded. So what we'd ask you to do is please place these in your 3-ring binder in the, I think it's the Streets and Sidewalks tab, and then in the future you'll continue to receive additional documents. As an example, on October 17th, we'll be talking about sanitary sewer, stormwater, and our original intent is a week or two ahead of time is to get to you this packet of detailed project sheets for that particular category, and we'll continue with that as time goes along. And one or two other comments on tonight's topic. We were considering having streets, sidewalks, bridges, transportation topics show up later in the sequence of presentations. And that was to allow sanitary sewer, stormwater, and water, culinary water, come first. Now, why would we have done that? And that's because if it seems like street resurfacing always gets the most attention. It's visible, we drive on it, and for years, you know, that's kind of been the highest priority. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but unfortunately, what sometimes happens is all these other underground utilities sometimes are forced to mirror what is the plan for street resurfacing, and sometimes what is lost is, well, are there other culinary water, sanitary sewer, stormwater projects that really are a very high priority and should, be given serious consideration even if there's no street resurfacing. This will especially come into play next month as we talk about some of the east side I&I that Jim will get into and some of the serious issues we face if we cannot solve this infiltration in inflow water into our storms or sanitary sewer system. So this 5-year CIP is going to be designed to try and make sure that each and every category gets its own kind of a deep dive into what we know of the condition of each of these component parts of each system, what is the priority for each of these areas, and whether or not there should be some standalone strong consideration given. But that's not going to take away from the need for continual integration. And Jim, especially, and his engineers, that's a critical task they face each fall and throughout the winter, and that is, how do you tie together not only our underground utility needs with street resurfacing, but also what about the other public entities, the NICORs, and anyone else that has underground cables or facilities in the public right-of-way. That's something else that needs to be considered. So please kind of keep that in mind. And one last item is, as we talk about these streets, sidewalks, bridges, other transportation needs tonight, there is the other reason that this switch was made is that we really need to have a serious conversation with you about increasing the summer of 2017 budget for street resurfacing, if that's something you want to entertain. As an example, even though with the local motor fuel tax, the sales tax increase, we're pretty close to about $5 million we can fund each year. There's a recommendation by the mayor on Streets 2.0 to do $10 million in the near future. We're up against some capacity limitations that Jim will get into on some of our contractors or contractor and other things. But as Jim will point out, and hopefully we'll have you kind of weigh in later on, is that to do anything above and beyond even just our normal street resurfacing, there's a lot of advanced inspection that needs to be done. It's critical, and you've seen those contracts before. So just keep that in mind. That's another reason why this is on for tonight, to talk about future budgets for street resurfacing above and beyond $5 million, which we've done the last year or two. So with that, I'll turn to Jim Karch, Public Works Director, for the presentation on this particular topic in our CIP. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, City Manager Hales. He's correct. Everybody wants to talk about streets. We're holding that to last. We want to keep your attention as long as possible. This is important. We're first going to, the way we're going to structure this, as we started off talking about, is breaking this up into 3 different components, because we want to get some very specific feedback from council tonight to hear from you and give you the opportunity to talk. First, we're going to talk about sidewalks. And this has really started off with something very positive. In your packets and up on the screen, you've already passed in 2015 a sidewalks master plan. You've been funding it, fully funding it. This is the 2nd year in a row you've been funding it. So that is a very positive thing. The ramps, curb ramps, go along with their street resurfacing. The more street resurfacing you do, the more that you do ramps. So whatever you put, if you put $5 million in street resurfacing, 10% of that goes toward sidewalk ramps. So they will get up to speed as we continue forward. There's about $7 million of outstanding ramps still sitting out there is what we project off our estimates, but they'll get done as we do resurfacing. So there's no need to be proactive. We should get to them as we go along. But here's the issue we want to talk about tonight. We want to talk about the fact that we're on track, but what we continue to hear are gaps. Oh, there's not a sidewalk in this area. Oh, we've got Connect Transit we were just communicating with. They've changed a lot of their bus routes, and they don't have sidewalks in a lot of the different places that they now have stops. We were talking just today with Connect Transit about some of their needs. And so for them, I said, well, what are we talking about? We're asking them to prioritize what their needs are. It's a partnership in our community of what we look at. And so gaps also deal with Connect Transit. They deal with residential. When we talk about complete streets, it means being able to get people to walk, people to be able to take buses, and then also bikes. And so all of those tie together. So some of what we talk about is this issue of what do we have to fund for the question we're going to start off with. I'd like to get some feedback. Would you like to put additional money? If we keep on task with the $600,000 a year, the last 2 years you've been, as a council, been allowing Public Works staff to put in the budget, do you see enough need out there to put additional funding during the next budget year into dealing with gaps, including some of the residential areas, and then also things like Connect Transit? Up on the screen, you'll see a great example. I love this example of Ryan Drive. Ryan Drive is actually a school walking route. Up until Ryan Drive, the condition of Ryan Drive was just deplorable. It was a terrible street. It was in bad condition. What this is a picture of is these are kids walking. We took a great picture of kids walking to the pool. And where are they walking? They're walking right down the center of the road. Whenever we redid the road, well, you can see up on the screen, we added sidewalks on one side as part of this project. That actually was in the sidewalk master plan. So as part of the sidewalk master plan intended by staff, there is a few gaps in there, but there's not enough. There's a lot of other ones. Mercer over by White Oak Park. There's other ones. I mean, and all of you could name some in your ward that are out there. So the question is, and I'd like to just get some feedback at this point, and then we'll keep going with the session. I'll start over with, actually, you'd like to start and go around the room, or however you'd like to do it, but get feedback on whether you'd like staff to increase funding next year for sidewalk gaps.
The difficulty of that, Jim, before I
Yeah.
turn it over to people, is that there's always the trade-off question.
Mm-hmm. That's
So, I
true.
mean, if we're doing these one at a time, then how do we prioritize one versus another? So it may be what we do is give some feedback and then come back and prioritize.
Very good. I'd accept that.
Okay, Alderman Lauer.
Well, I would like to know what we need in our school zones, because obviously you mentioned Mercer. We've had some feedback last year about that east side neighborhood and the school kids. Wondering, where that lies, how much it would, cost over and above what you already have planned, et cetera. So.
Alderman Sage.
Jim, you said we're fully funding per the master plan right now, right?
And that's for maintenance of our existing sidewalks and a few gaps. It's trying to make sure we get all of our sidewalks up to an acceptable service level within 10 years, and we're on pace to do that.
So the current fiscal year funding is how much per year?
$600,000.
Okay, and what is a rough idea of perhaps an annual increase that staff might bring forward after conversations with, say, Connect Transit or any of those other partnerships?
Excellent question. Staff would suggest an increase of $100,000 per year to go toward gap sidewalks. That can include some allocated toward Connect Transit high priority stops. It could also go toward areas like Mercer. It could go toward White Oak Park and other school routes that are not currently designated. So we're not trying to double that budget. The council is on a good pace right now with that.
Well, I mean, from a life safety perspective, I probably would echo what Kevin said from a school zone, viewpoint, as well as, again, connected transit. I mean, there's the city's made a huge commitment to connect it, and I guess I'd be interested in understanding, again, some of the priorities they're talking about as well. I mean, otherwise, we're just going to have a set of opinions up here without any kind of, focus points to kind of, gather around. So those seem to be two reasonable ones to put on the table. So thank you, Jim.
Alderman Longway.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, it's hard for me to look at things in isolation, so I'd like to see the whole picture, and what are we talking about? What areas are we talking about before I can make an intelligent decision?
So I think in this point, what we're hearing is some mild support, but we want to hear we see the whole thing. Maybe the 100,000 is something that might be for life safety issues, as Alderman says, appropriate. So,
Very good.
And
Anything against that? Is that fair? Is that fair from council?
I think,
We'll
okay,
accept
why don't
that
you go ahead and go,
move
because
on.
our time.
So next, we'll talk about a couple other highlights and then get back to a question about Hamilton Road. So with Complete Streets, that is part of Streets and Sidewalks. A big thanks to you as a council for the recent ordinance being passed and your direction on that issue. Again, we are continuing our efforts toward having a more comprehensive bicycling, pedestrian, and also the multimodal component of Connect Transit throughout our community. So with that, we'll move on. Hamilton Road and Fox Creek Road. This you've seen before, but very briefly, the city has put a lot of money, a lot of time into the southern east-west corridor of Hamilton-Fox Creek Road. It can take 15,000 vehicles once it is completely done, and it is the major long-term corridor for this community. You already have Fox Creek Road on. It is on schedule to be able to begin construction during the 2018 construction season. The budget is already in place with motor fuel tax, so that is good news. But what we need to talk about is Hamilton Road. Hamilton Road, we've kind of talked on and off about that. The council has put this project as a high priority for multiple years. We've tried for Tiger grants, we've tried for fast lane grants, we have tried for other outside funding any way that we can, and we've continued to not have success with that. But because of that, we are getting to the point with Norfolk Southern, with our discussions with them, that now we need to come to a point where, as a council, during the next budget year, we are going to have to ask for commitment in the budget next year, or we're going to have to change our conversations with Norfolk Southern. It is, being that now we're pushing October, we're just entering into the budget season, it's important for you as a council to know that if this next budget year, we're going to be asking for to be put in the budget, $13 to $14 million. We're trying to finalize those numbers, but I wanted to give you tonight an estimate to be put in there for bonding is the funding source we're looking at to be able to continue moving forward with an at-grade for Norfolk Southern. A couple things you need to know about is we are looking to get an at-grade crossing. That is critical. If we don't, it'd be an additional $10 to $15 million for this community to finish that up. We've tried this a few different times with Norfolk Southern. I will let you know that we've had some really great success. They've had some changeover with some folks. We've had some great meetings. Tomorrow night, there's a public meeting. So we have a public meeting in this chamber with folks who will be coming. We'll be talking about on both Roosevelt and Western Avenue. There's two crossings existing with small amounts of traffic, and we're hoping minimal impact to the community. We've reached out, and we're getting some feedback from some residents asking them to see what kind of impact this would have. Western Avenue, because of its proximity to high-speed rail, we're hoping that won't have much. We're concerned about the proximity to that crossing. Roosevelt being south with the U.S. Cellular Coliseum and hopefully long-term economic development plans in that area, that might be a good opportunity to close that crossing down. So we're hoping to have some minimal impact to residents, but also leverage those two crossings to get an at-grade crossing for this community that would save us substantial dollars.
Just so we to clarify for the audience, so essentially if we're closing off a couple, when we go to Norfolk Southern, we're not going just with cup in hand. We're going to offer them taking out maybe two crossings in downtown Bloomington west side in exchange for an at-grade crossing.
That's correct. That's basically what we're asking. And we think we're actually able to leverage that. In the beginning, they actually wanted about 5 closures. And we got them down through discussions down to 2. This is not a guarantee. We wanted to continue this dialogue forward. But it's very important that they see the thing that we've continued to hear from them is funding. They need to know that the council, we pass resolutions, they need to know that the council is ready to be moving forward. And why? Because we could, if we were aggressive with it, we could begin construction as early as the 2018 construction season. And so that's critical. And does that mean that Norfolk Southern could change that time frame? But it's important for us as a community if that's important. What questions?
Just to clarify for everyone in the audience, it also is a bond, a 20-year bond, for example, not certainly unreasonable, could be more, but for a project like this. And so the payment of that would probably be somewhere around maybe $700,000 to $800,000 a year. So just to make that clear, we're not talking about taking 13 to 14 million dollars out of 1 week's paycheck, so to speak.
And that's one of the important facets, Mayor. That's correct. It's important to know that's not all in 1 year. But we would like to talk about what questions you have. This has been a priority for this council for a while, but we need to know where we stand.
I think we've got some people who want to weigh in. Alderman Lauer and then Tim.
Right, and for the press and the public, I think it's important to look at those two crossings that you're talking about. How far away is the next available crossing?
It's just 1 block over for each one, for
And-
Morris
and
Avenue at
The
Western.
trade-off is the bridge that we're talking about building and having that at-grade crossing really is a vital artery for traffic in and out of that neighborhood. And there's one other which is on, I believe, the west side. Is that right, David? I believe that the other exit for that neighborhood actually goes west, and then you have to go north or south?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's out in the country, and so you'd be out in the county right away. It's not a city street, and so it's quite a trade-off. We've got a major artery with a number of homes out there that are rather isolated versus 2 city blocks that you only have to go a block away. And so
That's
to
the
weigh
hope.
that out from a traffic management perspective, it seems like a no-brainer to me, but maybe a little bit different when we look at the actual funding, though. Thanks.
And just on that, before I go to Alderman Sage, is there also is interest in people who own the property south of the Coliseum as part of downtown revitalization to close off maybe Roosevelt and Madison, and then they'd have about 7 contiguous acres to do something with. But Alderman Sage, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Jim, obviously, I'm a major proponent of the Hamilton, Commerce Bund project. But, and you alluded to this just a second ago, from an economic development perspective. I guess, is it possible that perhaps we could engage Austin and talk a little bit about some of the potential economic benefits of that, because that would certainly open up a long major stretch of commercial property once that road is put in there.
I think he provided that for us.
We, actually, it has been, we can send that out to the council. Again, it's been a little bit. We can refresh that, get some updates on that, and send that out to the council.
Yeah, because of, again, we don't always talk about the economic development benefits when we're talking about some of these major projects. I mean, the stuff on Fox Creek Road, we're talking about life safety stuff there. I mean, that's what's driving that, is we've got kids, crossing back and forth over a bridge that has to have no walkway on it. The Hamilton, Commerce Bund project, there's some life safety considerations there clearly, but there's also some economic development benefits there too. So if we can make that part of the conversation going forward, making sure that we're intentional and deliberate about including that in the conversations, I think that would be a plus. So
I
thank
think
you,
that
Jim.
Alderman Sage makes an excellent point, and as Austin, I think, has had its first order and second order causal impacts to this. And one of them would be there are lots of things, as Alderman Sage suggested, you can build and develop along that route, but also the secondary benefits is you're going to be able to go from corporate south to the interstates on a 4-lane highway without ever going on Veterans Parkway. And so there are all kinds of other repercussions for that.
And it's also safety issues. Rhodes Lane, tying into 150, is not it's been identified by IDOT as a high accident location, and that needs to be shut down. And so this would be part of it.
Alderman Black.
Thank you, and thank you, Jim. I talked about this before when we talked about Hamilton Road, is that I really haven't heard a lot of feedback in my ward about it, and I get the economic benefits of it. But I would like to note that you're mentioning the public meeting that's tomorrow, is that we've made no final determinations about closing any railroad crossings. We want to hear from the public first. There'll be formal action taken at some later point in time. And so we're kind of talking a little bit about it like it's a done deal when not necessarily that's the case. And I think that bears consideration for the residents that are over there, as we haven't heard their voice as part of the process.
The council has not put this in the budget. That's important to know. The construction budget is still ultimately up to you as a council to put into play. Another public meeting that's important for you to know about with Hamilton Road is Thursday night. So we actually have the closures tomorrow night from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. But then we have from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock another larger discussion, on the entire Hamilton Bund to Commerce project. So this isn't on the closures. This is about that project in particular.
Sure. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Jim?
So let's continue on. Let's talk about other major road and bridge projects. The streets master plan is nearly complete. We do have quite a number of streets that are being considered. I will be bringing that back to you as a council. And again, that will be part of that discussion with the capital improvement plan. You have to prioritize. How do you prioritize? We've been talking a lot about maintenance, but we also can't lose sight of the long term. Where should the city put their funding? How do you allocate? How do you differentiate between some of these large dollar projects that we have out there? And so we're hoping that this will provide some additional performance metrics for us to be able to give a direction and some objective direction. Bridges are another component of the capital improvement project plan. We've got Linden Street where the funding is secured. We're 95% complete with that bridge construction. I always get asked, it's always good to remind, you have the barricades up on that bridge, the Linden Street Bridge, because there's rebar under that bridge. It's actually dangling down. It is not in good condition. So we've had it assessed structurally, and you make sure you keep the traffic off that center lane, and that's why that's shut down. It's not for any other reason. We're trying to diffuse and change the load of that bridge, so that needs to be redone, and so we have that, the funding secured. But we do have along Sugar Creek, the Jersey Avenue and Cottage Avenue in the 5-year plan for us to consider. Moving on to traffic, we have talked extensively about signal modernization, the need for our 147 traffic signals to update those with more modern ability for us to communicate, plan, to be able to get traffic through effectively. We talk about the way that we get our traffic through. We know that. We've talked about it, so we're looking in the next few years to be able to change some of the way we do our signals as we update them. In the next few years, we're looking at some signals that are already underway from design standpoint. And so, Hershey and Arrowhead, Hershey and Clearwater, GE and Keaton, Towanda and Vernon is a cooperative effort with the town of Normal. We also have Towanda Barnes, Ireland Grove Road. That's also a cooperative effort with McLean County. And so, but in the near future, we have other signals as well. We have Airport in Fort Jesse, Hershey in Fort Jesse, Stride and Ireland Grove Road. So these are important for you to keep in mind. From a motor fuel tax standpoint, that traditionally is what has funded these types of signals. But again, we've had some delays from a staffing standpoint, with traffic engineering staff being where it's at. We've contracted that out to be able to help and keep those projects moving along. So it's good for you to know why there have been delays with those projects. Let's get to the big item on the agenda, general resurfacing. So whenever we talk about general resurfacing, it's made up of 3 different pieces.
Jim, Jim, we had a question.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
It's not really a question. It's more of a conversation.
Absolutely.
You and I have talked about the traffic on Hershey Road ad nauseum. And you also know that I am very appreciative of how hard you work and everything you do. However, the people on Hershey Road do not want those traffic signals at all. They want the traffic slowed down in that section. And as far as I'm concerned, you can take the $625 that has been allocated for that and fill the gaps in the sidewalk. I think everybody, all of the citizens would be very, very happy about that. Also, just slowing the traffic down all along Hershey Road, that's what the people really want. And I know that you've said that those houses never should have been built there in a main arterial, and that is true. But they're there now. And I think that what the people want should really take precedence over planning recommendations. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
They were, and the way staff answers that is they were in the budget approved. Council at any time, of course, can provide a different direction to staff, and we'll be glad to follow it.
Okay. All right. At this point, go ahead with the street resurfacing.
So with street resurfacing.
I'm sorry. Whoa, we have another. I'm sorry. Alderwoman Burgess.
What is the process for discussing these in more detail? Because so far as I've been on council, there really is no detailed discussion. We receive a packet wherein these are placed in a larger budget, and there's no, at least up until now, has not necessarily been those individualized discussions about traffic when it's smaller amounts of money. And I know it's kind of crazy to be discussing $600,000 as smaller amounts of money, but in comparison, we've talked a lot about Hamilton Road, which is a very large amount of money, but some of these smaller projects, they just seem to move forward without any opportunity for council or public input in a very directed way. So what are those opportunities?
Typically, with every one of these, the way that governance works for the council is we'll bring a budget to you. They'll have the different capital projects in them. If you as any time, and this city manager, you're welcome to jump in at any time, but as anything, it has the capital projects in there. You're welcome to pull them, change them, and then whenever we actually come back to you as a council, we don't, we have to come back to you once we bid a project or, get a consultant on board. Those types of things, of course, council at any point can change the direction with any of these topics. But in general, as a staff, what we have to do is we provide the projects to the city manager, who would then approve them, take them to council on an annual basis. They're approved. You as a council have the ability to make changes, of course, throughout any time, any point.
May I just add something as part of that answer that I think is very significant, and that is going forward. One thing we will be bringing towards the end of this, all these presentations, is a very robust public engagement, public information process, because as you pointed out, and I think Jim was just beginning to kind of give what has been the past practice. What should be, and I would strongly recommend needs to be the practice going forward, is even at a very early stage, if there is a conceptual plan for, say in this case, traffic signals at these two intersections, how do we make sure that the public or the residents on that street have a chance to weigh in before hardly any money has been spent? Now, you always have to have some information on, well, why is there a need? Is the levels of service so low from an engineering backup, congestion, inability for emergency vehicles to get through? You need some of that information to kind of serve as a basis. Why has this particular project risen to a priority? But before you begin any design, or you begin to say this over, say, the priority of other projects, that's when I think most cities fail, because they haven't allowed opportunity for the public, either those right in the neighborhood or those maybe across town. It's like, many of these collector roads, arterials, all of us probably use them sometime or another. And unfortunately, that's when you can have conflicts between what a neighborhood might want, because of their own limited neighborhood issues and concerns, versus the traveling public that wants to get from point A on the east side to point B on the west side. And have we done a good job? So this communication plan, I think, will be a turning point as to how we engage the public at all stages of the project, in the conceptual or pre-conceptual, during the design phase, which could incorporate easement acquisitions, et cetera, and then ultimately during the construction phase. How do they plan for what's going to happen and when? Who do you call? Things like that. Now, of course, this is a labor-intensive process that we will be recommending. But those cities that have really been serious and have had a strong citizen engagement have built into these 5-year capital improvement plans a heavy, heavy element of citizen engagement. So you'll see that probably in another month or two, more detail on that and how that we propose be an integral part of all aspects of the CIP, from its initial idea stage to all the way through completion of construction.
And thank you for that clarification, because I think that hits what I was hoping to bring out, is that we're missing that detail. I mean, we vote on a package that says this street will be resurfaced, and before we know it, suddenly that resurfacing means we're also going to widen it, which means that the people are going to lose part of their yards or their parkway, and the trees are going to get cut down. And it means that suddenly traffic is going to increase, so the speed limits are going to increase. And it's the inability to comment on all those little decisions involved in it that can have a really profound impact on both public safety and perception of resident enjoyment of their property that seems to be missing from this process. And I hope we can get in there, because what we want is for when you're done with a project, for all the neighbors to say, thank you, what a great job, as opposed to being very concerned about the fact that they weren't included.
Alderman Black and Fruin.
Thank you. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole here.
I won't let you.
Thank you. But this is making me think of, we got an email over the weekend, and we get them occasionally for people who are upset about speed limits and that whole process, and maybe it's part of something we can pencil in for a future committee of the whole discussion is either making that as part of public engagement, because I don't think at any point, not to my knowledge, we can't come up here and make a resolution to change the speed limit on something. We could, but that'd be just a terrible practice.
The council has to. A change in the speed limit has to be enacted by the
Right.
council ultimately.
But
But
we
we do
wouldn't
have
want
administrative process that precedes that.
Absolutely, and yeah.
But like you said, and
it's a
I
poor
think even
practice.
Alderman Burgess has also raised issues and questions. We're working on some ideas. How can we even, on things such as speed limits or other changes in regulatory signage, how can the public feel like they very much had a role to play and were here before any kind of final decisions were made? So we're coming forward with some recommendations on that.
And I hope that to me is a priority because I continue to hear feedback about how people want to be engaged in this process, but I don't think we should just be focused on, what do a couple neighbors think about this. I think it should be a very mathematical, analytical, engineering focus along with feedback from the neighbors. Because a lot of times I see some of these numbers and people just want to quibble about 5 miles per hour, which I don't think is going to sink the ship. But I think this is a pretty key issue. I know that Amelia's brought it up before and others, that I really hope that we can come up with a way, maybe like our other boards and commissions, that staff, in the conjunction with citizens, work together to make recommendations to the council, and that may satisfy more of that public engagement piece that we're constantly looking to do more of.
It will satisfy some, but like Lincoln always said, you'll never come up with any
surely won't.
process to satisfy everyone.
Surely won't. But right now, there's nobody that's in the public that's engaged in this process, and I think if anything, it'd be an improvement there.
Yeah, I think clearly. Yeah, Alderman Fruin. Sure. And then we're going to go ahead and move on.
Thank you. And I have to bite my tongue several times because I always like to give history lessons, but I think the beauty of our council is that we've got some history and we've got some new perspectives, so I do value that. And I really hesitate to bring this up because I think it could be viewed as disagreement, but I want to make sure it's not viewed as disagreement. And we talk about signals on Hershey. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. I'm very neutral on it. But it illustrates that opinions change as councils change. And some of us up here, I think, David probably, Maboka, David Hales, maybe some of our department heads, remember a very contentious discussion we had about the 2 traffic signals on Hershey and also the one at Caitlin and Auto Row. Yeah. And we had a very contentious budget discussion, $700,000 apiece, whatever they are, between the predecessor in Ward 5 and the predecessor in Ward 8. And very lively, let's say it's a lively discussion to say the least. But it just illustrates one example. I'm not trying to say we got a right or wrong here. We could talk about Hamilton Road, but these decisions and these priorities just shift from council to council to council, and we need to get our handle on some continuity and at some point say, we've been talking about Hamilton Road for X number of years, it's time to get on or get off. We've been talking about lights on Hershey for a handful of years, time to get on or get off. But so history lesson is good, but also new perspective is good to see what the current attitudes are. And I can't think of anybody that's more important in making these decisions than that particular neighborhood and or school. So this ties in also with sidewalks. When you look at Ryan Drive, when you look at Walk, Oakland School, some of those sidewalks, you don't have to peel back to it, but on Ryan and Walk is a good example. Some of those sidewalks, exaggerating, creep up halfway up to their front door. Those are very shallow front yards. So, Mayor, I don't know how we have this conversation, but every one of these topics, we can just go on and on and on, and we just need more engagement to know how the 10 of us feel on these things. And
I think citizens, and I think that's what people have been asking for.
Yeah.
Right.
And, yeah, let's just leave it at that. So, Johnny, your point's a good one. You're as familiar and up to date as anybody on Hershey Road. And maybe there is a difference today than there was 3 or 4 years ago, but I hope the rest of you are not in agreement that it was a very contentious budget discussion about those intersections.
Okay. Jim, go ahead.
With general resurfacing, a couple of things that we talk about, okay, keep us going. So the street and sidewalk, we talk about it. Normally we talk about what is resurfaced, and you'll notice right in the middle, it's $4.8 million of actual money we're putting toward resurfacing. But it's good to know that includes sidewalks, it includes the sidewalk curb ramps. So it's not just the $4.8 million. Because right now we have a local motor fuel tax that generates $2.4 million a year. We have a quarter-cent sale tax that generates $2.4 million a year. That goes into resurfacing and the sidewalks and the ramps. But what else? We also have state motor fuel tax money that we save up for those large projects like the Fox Creek Road Bridge next year. But then it's important to note we have our crews also doing a lot of that work out there doing concrete panel replacement. I like to use Eagle Ridge as an example because I was driving with my daughter. She's getting her permit and we're driving around the neighborhood, and it's amazing. All of that neighborhood the streets were just failing all throughout them, and our crews went in throughout that whole neighborhood and it just looked entirely different when they were done. So on those low volume streets, again, our own crews do a lot of that work and they repair a lot of those concrete panels. So let's talk about, this actually ties in, this is the revenue. This is from finance, this is some of the revenue dollars that we have coming in. The thing that I'd like to highlight is, look at the middle column talking about the dollars. It's inconsistent, and this is the hard thing from a staff and a communication perspective. It is very difficult to have a robust communication plan without a solid 5-year plan to be able to talk about where we're going next. One of the difficult things in the past few years is just trying to get a handle on what is the funding for those next few years. So we really appreciate that solid direction so we can then start communicating and easily having those proactive public meetings. That will make a crucial difference in our communication and ability to talk to folks. Again, with our resurfacing, these numbers are slightly different because this is the actual asphalt that was spent out on the road. It doesn't include sidewalk ramps and the like. So even the $10 million bond, for example, it was actually only $8.6 million of asphalt because we had to do sewers. We had to take care of the sewers underneath there. We didn't have the money for that. So you can see that money has increased for resurfacing. It's a key thing. I've said this before. Whenever I started at the city, you had $500,000 that we were doing, and we are ramping that up. That's important, very important. But how do you as a community set a service level? We've done a lot of work as staff trying to determine and over the years talk to you about the ratings and how we rate the streets. We beat that drum profusely. But now how do you as a council set the service level? You can see on the screen right now, there's a lot of red. There's a lot of red in this community, and I had one resident say, well, this would be great if red was good. But unfortunately, red is not, that's the opposite. So how do we then deal with this service level? So what we as a staff are proposing for you as a council is to consider a tiered rating system for our community so that we can actually be affordable and be able to continue moving the ball forward. What we're suggesting is for our arterial roads, those the large trunk roads that have the 10,000 vehicles plus, we're suggesting the council have a rating of 5. And so that's middle of the road. There's no potholes typically on a 5 section. So that's where you have typically the higher speeds, you have more volume, more traffic. So you maintain them at a higher level because that's what most people, you can get off your local road onto the arterials. Collectors, those are again different types of roads, but they still carry a lot of traffic. And so with the collectors, we're saying a 4 because again, there will be some potholes, but it won't be extensive. 3s for locals and alleys. Well, you'll notice most of the city are local streets and alleys. Look at the mileage in the centerline miles. Arterial roads at 54 miles, half that is collectors, and then you have over 4 times the amount, almost 5 times the amount, the number of local centerline miles. Well, the reason for that is we are suggesting we try to leverage, our own staff is doing a great job. We have streets and sewers back to what we spend our money on currently. They're maintaining a lot and trying to stretch the life of our existing pavement. We're trying to leverage our own crews. They do a great job in the fact, last year they threw 60,000 pounds of hot asphalt by hand. The amount of work that they're doing is great. We need their assistance to be able to stretch this life. But it's better for them to work on some of the local smaller volume roads. It's better for us to work on those and deal with some of the potholes. I think about with Alderman Painter, Lamont, it was when we were just talking about that they're grinding that right now. And our crew is going to take a road that we wouldn't be able to get to in the next 5 years. Many of you are shaking your heads. We've talked about these in a lot of your wards. We stretch the life of what we have, and those are our crews doing it. So, but what that would take, if we staggered and tiered that rating, is an attainable just over $8 million. Even if council were able to dedicate $8 million a year, we would then be able to, in the next few years, get this community up to where the streets are not something citizens talk about to the level they do now. This is a very tough topic. We hear this a lot, but to try to get to the $8 million level, and why do we say $8 million? It's a reasonable rating. It's attainable. It's also attainable from a contractor point of view. As City Manager Hales pointed out in his introductory comments, that's attainable by our local contractors. If we push it up too high, it is difficult, and where our costs actually go up. You think economies of scale, the more asphalt, the cheaper it gets. It's actually not always true. You hit a point of diminishing returns, whereas it actually can cost us more. So let's move on. Yes?
That $8.8 million, how long would it take to get to these minimums?
To those minimums, what we're suggesting is over the 5 years, this is, actually, this is great. In just a second, I'll answer that question for you. It's a great question. So what we're looking at in the 5-year plan is just that. Right now, we have dedicated funding right now for, you can see the 3.4, 3.6, all the way down, plus this Streets 2.0 package of $25 million. If that were stretched over the 5-year plan, we would be getting to the $8.6 million a year mark. And that's kind of what we're, as a staff, asking for consistent funding. We're asking for your ability to allow us to plan with utilities and sewer work. And so that's what we're asking for to get to that type of a level. Now, what do you get out of it? That's kind of, like, what are we looking to get out of that? This is, in a given year, this is a map from before 2014. $8.6 million was actually what we put on the ground during the $10 million bond project. We're essentially saying what citizens saw with the $10 million bond project, we're asking for every year. And we're saying that's the level it's going to need to get to for us to be able to get these streets back up to a sustainable level. So in 5 years, let's get to the 23 million. You can see this is kind of what it looks like. But let's get to this. Our staff, unfortunately, right now it's construction season. We didn't have the time to generate a new map, but we're going to leverage an existing map we had. If we had $15.5 million, we would actually, over 5 years, we'd be able to get to 30% of the streets. About 28% is what it came up with. At $43 million, we are saying we would resurface 20% of the streets in the community, a fifth of the streets. So the question, Alderman Howman, that you had is, how does that, in 5 years, we'd get 20% of the streets, a fifth of the streets. Think about the logic of that from the standpoint of how long streets last. Let's go back to this slide right here. Life expectancy for asphalt changes. Arterial roads, it lasts a shorter amount than the local roads. Local roads last a lot longer. If we were able to get 20% in 5 years, we would get the entire community in 25 years. We're hoping for the fact that, it's simple math. Costs will increase over time, but we're trying to make this so this is attainable for our city, where we're at funding-wise, and then also be able to understand we're trying to stretch the life of the pavement, too. These numbers we're using are based on old data that we have. Currently, we're doing more pavement preservation. Our crews are doing an amazing job stretching the life of our pavement as well, so we're hoping to get more life out of it. So what I'm trying to tell you is in 5 years, we'll get 20% of the streets. We're continuing to extend the life of it if we can get to that $8.6 million level with street resurfacing. So let's continue. The one thing that's important is, how do you bridge that gap? How do you bridge that gap between where we're at with the quarter-cent sales tax and the local motor fuel tax? If we do bonding, it's just important to know if we're leveraging some of that funds that we already have, at some point, we have to figure out how do we make it sustainable. Because what we don't want to do, at least from a staff standpoint, is we don't want to do something and not be sustainable. After 5 years, we've run out of money and we're right back in the same situation we were before. So that's one just thing we have to be aware of. From a staffing perspective as well, we have to be realistic with you and know that if we over double our resurfacing budget, we can't accommodate that from a staffing perspective. 10 years ago, we had 9 more staff than we have now. So we've increased a lot of our capital budget in the engineering division, and we actually have cut back on staff significantly. In the streets and sewers division as well, if we're going to put more focus on our streets and sewers division, they need additional resources as well. They need additional manpower and equipment to be able to keep up with the roads. If we're going to be trying to stretch the life of those local pavements, our own crews need to be adequately resourced as well. And so again, with the traffic engineer and traffic technician, we used to have that as a staff back in 2009. We no longer have those positions. And again, we've talked to you about those in the past before. All of those are key for public works. If we're going to ramp up our capital projects, we want to make sure we're effective with it. And communication is a great thing. It also takes a lot of energy and staff time, which is part of the reason it's been a struggle. So adequate planning, adequate resources, and again, within 5 years the community would see a very big difference. The last part that we want to talk about is sewer repair. We'll talk about this October 17th at the Committee of the Whole, but just 2 slides, a touch point. West Taylor is a great example that we use often. In 2016, or this year, we were resurfacing that street. It cost us $176,000 to resurface this stretch of West Taylor. Now, if we wouldn't have looked at the sewers underneath, great. We're doing fine. We would have been done with it. Thankfully, because of our now new way that we look at streets, we looked at the sanitary sewer. We looked at the what's underneath the road. It was ugly. I mean, it was absolutely ugly. If you look at the amount of sewer repairs, we were still getting bills in, but we're expecting up to $75,000 of sewer repairs. We had manhole replacements. We had to line some of the sewer. We had excavation and replacing tap-ons. I mean, again, you can see red is not good on the screen. So it's just, that's the type of thing that as a community we can't just resurface streets. And you know this, we'll be talking about it more. So again, the question that we need to talk about is where do we need the right funding level to be? As a staff, we're trying to provide you with a professional recommendation for you to look at to be able to get our city back kind of in line with maybe what the service level expectations would be. And part of the other key is how do we have a sustainable funding source so we can plan and have a good communication plan.
Okay. Alderman Sage, and then...
I think Jim was...
Jim? Okay, we'll go this way.
Thanks. I think just one question, Jim, and I don't think we can do this in a binding financial commitment, but if the council would, here we go again on the council, but if the council would commit to pick a number, $8 million for 5 years, say we're doing it, we're committed to it next year, et cetera. Does that increase the competitiveness of the bidding? If we made a public statement that we're going to spend 5 times $8 million for $40 million, is that going to increase the competitiveness for the bidding?
I haven't circled back around and talked to another vendor who in the past has bid on it as well, but we would do that. If we had a consistent ability, we probably would make sure. We would do everything we can. We have a good local vendor. We also want to make sure we're as competitive as we can in the community.
In the absence of making a strong commitment from the council, I still see there's this fluctuation from whatever that number is, 2 to 5 to 10 to 5 to whatever. And I just don't think that gives competitors the confidence that they can come in here with their startup cost and set up shop and play. So I value the local contractors and construction people we have, but if we're going to tackle that much money, we need to take care of the taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Alderman Sage, and then Black and Hellman.
Yeah, and I was going to, and appreciate, Jim, you making that point, because that's a good one. But I also want to suggest, and I don't know an elected official who doesn't want to spend a gajillion dollars on streets and that kind of stuff, and that's important. But I'm going to circle back around to some conversations we've had up here the last few months, and I'll mention, Jim and Scott by name. I know Jim has specifically, over these past few months, begun to talk about when are we going to have some conversations about the need to reallocate money from elsewhere in the budget or make some hard decisions about how we're going to spend taxpayer money? Don't want to put words in your mouth, Jim, but I think that's the essence of what you've suggested. I know, Scott, you, again, don't want to put words in your mouth. I know you talk about conversations you have with your constituents, and part of it is if you want to do this, then what are you willing to do without? You know, and those are the hard conversations that I candidly, I mean, I want to spend more on streets, but until this council's not showing me the ability to make those tough decisions, and so if we don't come to some consensus or point of agreement as we move through all these different conversations about the CIP, then I'm going to suggest we've not made much progress as a council if we're not willing to talk and give staff the direction that they need to say we're going to reallocate money. Because if we're going to spend an extra $3 million a year on streets, there's only two places where that money can come from. It's either new revenue or it's reallocated money from elsewhere in the budget. So again, I'm encouraged, and I want to move the CIP forward in the streets, but until these folks up here, until we, myself included, we can have those tough conversations. There's a lot of, part of this is going to be kind of an academic exercise as well, in my opinion.
Alderman Black, Howman, and Burgess.
Thank you, and it seems we're all on the same page here. I guess my feedback is that, yes, 8 million is great. Why not 15 or 20? But I don't know where that context would come from. And I don't want to come out and say, well, let's slow down and take a look at it, because I don't want the headline to read Scott Black opposes street funding. Don't do that, please. But the context, I don't know if this is part of a bigger conversation, as we start to build these pieces together, because this is the first time I've seen this packet in this form. I've seen this in terms of a table, but this is actually a really good way of looking at it. And as I do, there's a couple things in here I think that there are ones that we want to do, and then there's ones we have to do. And I hate to pick on Ward 8, but the Grove subdivision has two big projects in here, and I think that we're legally obligated to do those. But I guess a question that we had asked a while ago is, at what point do those obligations end, or what more do we have come down the pipes? Because
Not for a long time.
There's
Right.
more.
Probably
It's the gift that
another
keeps on
50.
giving.
it's the gift that keeps on giving, which is unfortunate, because, as someone now, I have to go back to my ward and explain, we're having to give our money to a subdivision for pavement oversizing, whereas I have a tough time trying to get some areas, thinking of Union Street and others that, Oak, for instance, that need the work, and now we have to make a subdivision have oversized roads. And I don't want to turn this into a my ward versus your ward, because we want to get away from that, but I guess I'm looking for, from staff, where does this conversation go next? Does it go to, we vote on the list of these roads? Do we set the funding level and then revisit it year to year? How much maneuverability do we have within that year to year? Where's that increase? As I'm seeing it, about $5 million a year coming from. These are all questions. If it's a bond, maybe that's the answer, but what does that look like to our other debt restructuring with that $400 million number that continues to linger in my mind?
Just briefly, that's why we're not asking you to make any final decisions till we get all through this. And we really tried to package together, a realistic a 5-year plan that there is identified funding, either from debt issuance, pay-as-you-go, or a combination of both, and in accordance with some of those higher level fiscal policy decisions you make that helps us in crafting that, and how aggressive you want to be, like in issuing debt, so keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And if I could also, I think it's important to point out too, just looking at this number, now this is just street resurfacing. We've also got to add, what is the water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater needs underneath these roads? Now typically, we wouldn't be doing the street resurfacing unless there is no or limited underground utility work that needs to be done, correct? But, with any of this planning, as we all well know, there's some of these areas where we may not be able to do street resurfacing because of the high cost of underground utility repair, replacement, sewer lining, et cetera, et cetera. And as those roads continue to get pushed to the side, for those that are in better condition, how palatable is it going to be to you, to the neighbors, and people who use those. So that's, and as Jim gets into that, next month, you'll kind of get that added perspective, as well as what are the more critical funding dilemmas we face in those two enterprise funds. So it's, yes, this is one important component, but there's more to look at going forward.
Yeah. And it would seem to me, too, as I look at this list in even more depth, that perhaps there's ones that we have to do should be prioritized at the top of the list as opposed to ones that we should do and that we want to do. Because to me, this growth thing is just, it's one of those things I'm going to have to, bite my tongue and do it. Because we're going to be on the hook for legal fees if we don't. But, we can't have this conversation outside of knowing exactly what it is that we're committed to, whether it be by this council or previous ones, as we move forward.
Okay, Alderman Howman, and then Burgess.
Jim, thanks for all this information. What would be helpful for me, not tonight obviously, but going forward is, what will this do to our operating budget? You're talking about adding staff. So what happens, what are the potential increases in that area as well? Because, we're looking at potentially 10% of the CIP just on streets, let alone we're talking about underneath the streets and so forth. So how would that impact the operating budget as well? Thanks.
Okay. Alderwoman Burgess.
Thank you. One thing that is not mentioned in here, although you mentioned in your presentation, is this idea that we be effective with our money. And I think that's a very, very good point. And I hope to hear more as we move through this on how we can be smarter with how we deal with street design. Because we are a structured environment, and to some extent how we design our streets and the regulatory framework we place over them can control where people travel. And I'm specifically trying to get to this idea that some of our streets are more expensive to maintain than others. And to the extent that we can guide our traffic so that we are, focusing our resources on certain streets, I suspect we will be better off and more efficient with how we use our money, especially to the extent that we can work with the state streets that we have that are under state funding, and we get additional resources in order to help maintain those. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and how we might be smarter with how we design things. The other thing is, I want to go back a little bit to this idea that we have gap areas. I think that to some extent that is understated in this particular document, how many of those areas we have. We have whole neighborhoods in our city that are lacking curbs, gutters, sidewalks. Those essential services that we provide to everyone else. And why the decision was made not to put them in the time the neighborhood was built, I don't know. But the problem is it tends to be focused in some of our more modest areas, post-World War II, 1940s, 1950s areas. And, we have no plan yet to really address that lack of infrastructure. Which brings me to Scott's point, which is very well taken, in that we, in this particular plan, have in here a decision to expand our infrastructure in areas where there are not currently houses. And that's very, very hard to justify when we have neighborhoods that don't have adequate resources. I'm talking to you, but I know this is not your decision. And like Scott, I don't want to necessarily focus on a single development or a single area where people live, but unfortunately the Grove is a very good example, and it's very hard to understand how it is we have taken away our regulatory discretion. When we are dealing with very limited funds, how it is that we are somehow restricted from allocating those where they're most necessary. And as hard as it is to understand, it's even harder to explain that to residents, to say to them, I know your neighborhood is 60 years old, but you're not getting a sidewalk, but that brand new house that has yet to be built will get one as soon as it's built. And so I understand the position has been that there is nothing we can do. I find that very difficult to justify, and I think that as a council, we need to aggressively look at, are there ways to limit our exposure in that area so we're not expanding before we can adequately fund what we already have.
Okay. Alderman Lauer, and then Fruin.
Well, I agree with you on several of your points, Amelia, but I circle back around to some of the things that David Sage brought up. it seems like we need to prioritize, and this, to me, and to my constituency, would be a very high priority. And we have a number of things that, in our budget annually that we fund that seem to be special interest. An awful lot of it is entertainment venue related. And, I have, prior to running, I became aware of even some water shutoff issues with our culinary water where it feeds or controls 2 or 3 homes at a time in neighborhoods that are certainly maybe after the turn of the century, but before 1950. And those are issues as well as street resurfacing. And so there's a lot of mechanical things here that go on, and it's very complex. And so I agree with you on prioritizing those types of things, but we really need to think big picture in terms of our budget and really weigh out, if we're subsidizing the Coliseum, the BCPA, Parks and Recreation, prior to actually looking at the mechanicals of culinary water, of stormwater runoff, and many of these essential needs, I think we're doing a disservice. And so we really need to, I think we need to refocus on this and then really take a hard look at some of these other things that we're doing. It's just my perspective. Thanks.
Okay. Alderman Fruin.
For the record book, I will not be here on October the 17th. I know he started the night tonight with scheduling and conflicts, so I thought I'd better mention that. Unless I won't be here in present, but if I have a cold or cough, I'll call in.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, we talked about this only because Alderwoman Schmidt as Mayor Pro Tem, is not going to be, or might be a little late for one of the meetings where I'm going to be with illness. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All righty. Well, we had this conversation before. That's what the context of it was. Anything else, Jim?
Mayor, my comment was geared toward state law, right?
Right. Yeah.
State
No,
law,
I was
not-
just trying to clarify for Karen. Okay. At this point, we don't want you sick. At this point, we move on to Employee Compensation Strategic Plan Initiative, and we have a presentation by Mr. Hales, Nicole Albertson, and Dr. Lust, and then some time for council discussion.
Mayor, I just want to take a point of order. Let's see, Scott Sprouse, do we have Nicole Albertson on the line?
She's going to dial in a second. Okay, thank you.
So you'll hear Nicole Albertson dialing in. She's going to listen. Could be also available to participate tonight. She's out of town at training. So and if I can, let me just make a few comments. Dr. Luss, who many of you know, assisted the city greatly with a employee survey, satisfaction survey here last year. As we were having some discussions, Nicole and I, about trying to eventually help you as the council and help us establish a long-term employee compensation strategic plan. Let me just...
Is she on?
Okay.
Nicole?
Yeah, hi.
Welcome. David Hales was just finishing up some remarks.
Okay, great.
As we were having some discussion about how we can all work together on trying to establish some consistent, some clear, some specific ways in which we establish some high-level goals and objectives going forward on employee compensation, whether it's working on collective bargaining direction and strategy, and doing the same with non-union members. How do we ensure that whatever is our plan, we've identified what is necessary to attract and retain good, high-performing employees? How do we continue to monitor our total pay and compensation with the market, whatever the market is? These are all things that I think for a very high-performing organization following best practices, ultimately we would want to have identified. It is I think a complex as well as it's not a short process. It'll take some time. But without it, I think we just go year to year continuing to have the same conversations over individual components of compensation without really trying to get our arms around the total picture, the big picture of where we're going to go with compensation to the most valuable asset we have, and that is our employees in providing these services. So during that time, we got talking to Dr. Luss, had him come in, and as we had some conversation, we thought that it would be extremely beneficial for all of us to have him come in and just help give some overview of his background in working in both private and public sector of employee compensation, including what you're going to hear tonight is his role in doing some local market compensation surveys, local being Bloomington Normal and things like that, some of the challenges of that, but also what are some of the things that we may want to do if we really want to be very forward-thinking and progressive in establishing a long-term strategy on addressing compensation for employees. So tonight is designed really kind of to set the foundation. As Dr. Luss will say, and I said in a late email this afternoon, a lot of this is just, it was pre-reading. We've made it known to him of the time commitment on presentation, wanting to get in, but hopefully as you looked at the last 3 or 4 pages, it really got at the meat of the topic and what is really going to be the next steps, depending on some of the input and some of the discussion we have tonight. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Luss of Illinois State University. And Dr. Luss, if you could also just kind of, as you start out tonight, maybe just share individuals with your background, didn't have a resume or anything to really show your, but I did tell them that your academic background and everything, and even some of your contracting work focuses all around employee compensation. So, yep. Dr. Luss.
Yep. Thanks, David. I was really lucky to go to University of Kentucky at the time that I did for my doctorate because I learned comp from 2 guys that you won't know, but Mark Wallace and Charlie Fay. At the time I was there, they had one of the 3 best-selling textbooks in comp. Both of them were consulting extensively, and Mark eventually left academics and went into consulting full-time and added a 0 onto his annual pay, and it wasn't at the beginning, it was at the end. So I was really lucky to have background in working with both those 2 gentlemen. Charlie was actually the person who got me involved on the benefits side back in 1985. So the bulk of my research since 85 has been focused on worker attitudes towards pay and benefits, particularly on the benefit side of things. The other thing I would mention, when ISU hired me away from Wesleyan in 1988, I had 2 goals. One of the goals was to set up and start our HR major, which I was able to do, and the other was to be our comp guy. So for nearly 20 years, until I was about halfway through my time as department chair, I taught our primary compensation course. Since I've been back on faculty from the associate dean role, I've also been teaching our employee benefit course. So we have, in fact, 2 separate courses. So you have given me 27 minutes to go through 32 weeks of material. So, but that's all right. So I didn't want to kill you with the 42 slides, but David said give us some background. So if you didn't like it, it was his fault. I'm not going to go through everything, but I do kind of want to just focus on a couple points here. Oop, we got a very touchy mouse. Am I going to go better? Yeah. Unfortunately, we have lost over the years a lot of good data on compensation. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce used to do annually a survey of their members. It was a great resource because it broke out for us information by sector, by job, by size, all kinds of things. They don't do it anymore. I did the Bloomington Normal Human Resource Council survey for 13 years. That was during part of the time I was department chair. It just got to be too much because the survey took over 3 months to do. I stopped doing it. Jim Jawahar, who was my assistant chair, picked it up. When I moved to associate dean, he moved into department chair role, and it got to be too much for him. So our local HR council survey hasn't been done for, I don't think, 8 or 9 years since Jim and I stopped doing it. So we've lost some resources that historically we would have had available to us to look at this. So the numbers I presented in the slides are at the national level. Okay, these come from the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. These were the March figures. They just came out with the June figures on Friday. I looked at them and they're not that much different, so I didn't bother to update what you've got. But if you want the June numbers, we can get those. But this is a difficult area because you're always talking about context, right? As we see here, generally we're looking at about 68% of compensation dollars are actually spent on pay, a little over 31% spent on benefits. But that differs by sector. Private sector, it's much more heavily weighted towards pay, about 70%. State and local government, 63% towards pay and much heavier on benefits. We throw unions into the mix, it shifts by about 10% towards the benefit side. Again, these were just some private sector stats that the Bureau of Labor Statistics made available. You see in the goods producing sector, it's almost 11% difference. In the service sector, it's right on 10% different. So we always have to factor in and make sure that we're making appropriate comparisons here as we go through. Some of these early slides in terms of decision making, this is always a balance, right? We're trying to attract and retain employees, but we're also trying to impact performance. But we've got to do it keeping costs in line. We've got to maintain legal compliance. So everything we're doing in comp is a trade-off. Okay, that's what makes compensation so difficult to deal with. To get to the balance, we talk in terms of equity. I'm not going to go through all these slides in a lot of detail, except to say that equity always implies comparisons. And unfortunately, there's not one type of equity we've got to look at. We need to look at external equity, comparisons with our external labor market, with the firms we compete with for labor. Internal equity, we look at the relative importance of positions within our organization. And then individual equity, we look at the contribution of our employees to the organization. All right, now all of these apply on both the dollar side and the benefit side. The benefit side, we're typically looking at external equity or that external fairness piece, but there's some things we can look at there real quickly. So to combine all three, there's techniques that exist. I'm not going to deal with it on the dollar side because you're over 80% negotiated, so it doesn't make sense to worry now about how we make comparisons for internal equity, but there are processes that are developed to do that. We can go through those at another time if you want, but for right now, I didn't feel like we wanted to get into that. How does all this look? That's part of the problem with compensation is there's a lot of ways we can do things. Inevitably, any system is going to have base pay. There's going to be some form of raises, be it performance-based, seniority-based, negotiated, whatever. Could be incentives, could be bonuses, but again, we have to remember the context. Private sector, because we do have a profit that we can work with. We do see bonuses available. We do see incentives available. You're not going to deal with those. You know, I work at a public university. I've never had a bonus. So some of the pay forms are not available to us in this context of a public sector entity. So that will have an impact on that relative split between the pay and the benefit piece of things. Benefits can be about anything. I worked on a project with a big insurance firm in the western suburbs, and we looked at employee attitudes towards 38 different benefits. So you can get as complicated or uncomplicated as you want with benefits, which again leads to the difficulty of the decision making. Basically, we're kind of thinking about 4 clusters. There's the legally required things that we have to have. There are the various protection programs, which are the most expensive, the pension retirement system, if we choose to have one, health insurance, which we have to have, and other types of things there. Payment for time not worked, anytime employees are actively not engaged in work-related activities, but they're still getting paid, that would factor in, and there's a lot of ways that can be structured. And then everything else could be anything you can think of, from on-site cleaning services to credit unions to education reimbursement, whatever. So there's a zillion different benefits we might take a look at. Some of the numbers, I did mention that the costs vary widely. The costs vary by sector, but these are the values for state and local government in that Bureau of Labor Statistics survey. I did make one mistake there, that 12% for health insurance is for all insurance. So that does include life insurance. It also includes disability insurance. Actually, health insurance is 11.5% instead of 12. So that remainder number should be about 7%, and the health insurance is the biggest piece, typically for state and local government at 11.5, and then retirement at about 10.5. So it's off just a little bit, but the magnitude is still about the same. Meaning, we can, if you want to ask, we can talk about that. All right. Before I get into the meat of it and the things I think you're going to want to think about, were there any questions with that background information?
And thank you, Dr. Lust. I was particularly fascinated with a couple of the slides with the balance in the private sector versus public sector from a total compensation perspective, with the salary ratio versus the benefits ratio. I know I've struggled with some big questions up here over the years, and one of them is it ever possible for a municipal government to bring their benefits in line with the surrounding private sector?
Yeah, now, remember what these percentages are showing us. It's showing us of each dollar of compensation, what proportion goes to each side. I don't want to lead you to the idea that municipal governments have better benefits in general than the private sector does. It's just that the private sector has more ways to do the pay side of things. So typically that percentage would be a higher percentage of each dollar spent than it would be in the public sector. The public sector, because you don't have the opportunity for bonuses and those types of things, would spend relatively less for each dollar of compensation on the pay side than it would on the benefit side. So I didn't want to leave you with the view that benefits are, more money is spent on it. It's just per capita, as we split it out, it's a different split, that's all.
Okay, same size pie, just different
Same
sizes.
size pie, right.
Okay. What about the...
But the short answer to your question is sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the perception I have, and I need to know if it's reality, that in the past, the trade-off in the private versus the public sector was public sector employees were more willing to have less salary dollars because the benefits package was richer. And in fact, what's happened over a period of time is that those public sector benefits package continued to be rich and continued to grow at the same time that public sector salaries began to become more in line with private sector salaries
Yeah.
as well. Is that a perception or is that reality?
You've got, to a degree, historically, it is reality.
Okay.
What you've got, though, is a little bit of an intervening factor in that most public sector entities are heavily unionized. And I mean, I'm not going to get into the history of benefits, but there's 4 or 5 really big pushes for the importance of benefits, and unions were one of them.
Sure.
So from the 1930s to about the 1970s, unions really did increase the number of benefits that were available, the level of benefits, and then that created a ripple effect because most firms are not going to give a benefit to unionized employees and not do it for the entire organization. So you get a little bit of a confound in there in that you've also got the union influence there too. The other thing that happens with union negotiation is there's a lot of places where in a given year an organization couldn't afford a large increase in pay, but they could add a benefit relatively cheaply, add life insurance,
Right.
or add disability insurance. So in a lot of cases, yeah, particularly in unionized settings, we see benefits being added because we couldn't do anything on the pay side of things.
Okay.
There are figures available through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, not in one place. You got to go through about 4 different reports to figure it out. But if you all want, I can try to get dollar comparisons across different sectors. The percentage piece of it is pretty easy to find, but the actual dollars, private sector, they're spending $55 on comp. Public sector, it may be more like 40, and then how that breaks down.
Okay.
But it's not, it is neither a quick nor easy analysis.
Thank you, Dr. Lust.
Okay.
Anything else?
Maybe just one little footnote. Maybe you could differentiate the private sector for us a little bit. Obviously, we have small business and small business compensation, which is different in most cases
Very
than
different.
larger
Yeah.
corporations. And we
Right.
have several large corporations we're lucky to have, but we also have a very large community of small business and small business employment as well.
Right. Later on, going to mention a couple things, but size is clearly a factor. Generally, size is going to have an impact on your ability to pay. So in all of these surveys, we see that typically small business would have maybe a quarter of the paid time off that larger entities would have. And by larger, typically, they break it at either 500 employees or 1,000 employees. After that, there's not much difference between 1,000 and 3,000 or something like that. But for small business, yeah, it's a huge difference. You're much more likely to not be able to afford to do a retirement plan. I've worked with some smaller organizations in town just trying to figure out how we can do even a 401k that employees fund because of the complexity involved with setting one up. And there are some different options that one can use with small business if that's the route that you want to go. But yeah, generally size is a huge factor. Sector is also extremely important. I wish the Chamber of Commerce still did their survey, but there were private sector entities that had more like 66% of their total comp cost on benefits and only 33% on pay. So even within the private sector, there's huge variation in terms of what you're seeing and where the money's spent and what one is able to offer.
Thank you. Jim, do you have a question?
Thank you. Dr. Les, I've been kind of a vocal commenter on benefits and compensation with the thought that, from my perspective, that the public and private sector have really come out of balance. I might mention, for what it's worth, in my prior employer, from 2005 to 2011, I worked in a department total rewards, compensation benefits. So I have a little bit of a background, even though it's dated by 5 years now. So I had a chance to look at a lot of compensation surveys. I guess if I had one theme to this whole thing, I think our history has been that we've compared ourselves to other governmental groups, Champaign, Peoria, et cetera. And I guess from my perspective, I just don't know if our culture has changed to the point that we should be comparing ourselves with top 20 employers in Bloomington Normal, the Illinois State, the Illinois Wesleyan, the State Farm, the country. And the reason I say that is I'm thinking about who pays our bill, who pays the compensation and benefits, and it's our residents and our tax and our small businesses. And I'm thinking, is it fair for our average taxpayer to be contributing property tax dollars, sales tax dollars, et cetera, to city government who enjoys, my perception, a higher level of benefits and compensation for similar positions? So I'm more of a compare it to the Bloomington Normal market as opposed to other governmental groups. So tell me, does that play or not?
I wouldn't do either or. The first question you want to ask yourself is, who are our competitors for labor? Where are we going to lose employees? Certainly some employees, clerical jobs, can go to Country and State Farm, but a lot of positions would have to be to other governmental entities. So I think the answer is you don't have to do either or. I think I would do both to ensure that you've got a good sense of the labor market that you're dealing with. Unfortunately, one of the hard things with comp is even when we start to look at jobs, I don't know, the Director of Parks and Recreation, that could be a nationwide search. Well, now you're looking at municipalities all over the nation. Now, I don't know that I would want to get into trying to survey that broader group, but you do need to be a little sensitive to the types of searches that one would typically have. I think generally we're probably looking at Illinois or primarily Midwestern searches. So that would be the comparator group that I'd look at. But short answer to the question is I'd look at both. I wouldn't just look at one or the other.
And just to FYI, for the International City County Management Association does, if you want to find Parks and Rec directors throughout the country, the Midwest, Illinois, whatever, that kind of stuff's easy to get, from our perspective, at least at the director level, not below the director level.
Mayor, if I could, just, in recent years through cost cutting, even the ICMA has backed off that. In fact, you even go to some of the municipal yearbooks and if they look at anything, they may look at wage but no benefits. So even they have begun to get out of even that particular, I think, service of looking at compensation as they used to do, which you're right. They did a lot of
Used
that.
to have a compensation every year, big thick folder, yeah.
Well, and there's a reason for that. It's easy to do pay, and benefits is really, really hard. I'm going to tell you.
Let's see, Alderman Black.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the presentation. This is highly appreciated. I know this is a topic that's been kind of on the table for some time, and I appreciate the high-level nature, kind of getting us all in a level setting in your comments in relation to how difficult it is to compare. I mean, you can look at it in a number of different ways, and kind of how I'm thinking about this, it's all about trade-offs, and we're talking about this with the capital improvement plan, is that we can say these things up here, but if we're not willing to kind of take the heat, either if it comes to cutting benefits, whether it be medical, dental, vision, or whether it be salaries themselves, then we have to deal with the trade-off of upset employees and the potential turnover that goes along with that. But I guess I was looking for a little bit more specifics, and maybe you have this, maybe this isn't the time, but for instance, payment for time not worked, I'm looking at your benefit cost slide, and how the compensation dollars in state and local government we see, about 7.2%. And we've kind of talked about this briefly at other times, is that, it seems as though a lot of the days off that the city employees enjoy, that the rest of the community does not. I think that we have, Columbus Day coming up. Is the City Hall open on Columbus Day?
We're open for Columbus Day.
Okay.
City Hall is open on Columbus Day.
I think they traded that for, what was it, Martin Luther King holiday, or it's still up around, what is it, 12, 13, Lori, on holidays? 11 and a half holidays,
Yeah.
so that's...
Yeah, I mean, they can point, okay, my point is just that's an example of where, that time off, I hope that 7.2% is encapsulating those type of holiday paydays, and how that compares. It just seems, it's very challenging when we're talking to residents and they're saying things like, I had to work on MLK Day, but I couldn't go to the city and do whatever. Those are the things that I think I hear some of that latent frustration in the community, and I don't know if at some point in time we're going to maybe be in executive session, because this is a personnel discussion, talking seriously about what actions can we take with this information, because I hate to go through this exercise and talk about it and then not actually lead to some conversation. Maybe my way in.
And just very briefly, unless we're going to get into specifics of collective bargaining negotiation or pay for a specific individual, the bulk of this strategic planning discussion is, as I've talked to Jeff, is going to have to be in public.
Sure.
But anyway, Jeff will give us more fine-tuning counsel going forward.
Gotcha.
Because we're talking about personnel policies.
Absolutely, and I know that some of the, I mean, I work in HR, and so some of the companies will hold this information very close to their chest. They don't want to let that out there.
Well, and that's, one of the things we're going to get to is, if you all do want to do some kind of a survey, that would certainly be something you could look at. I mean, because paid time off varies so widely between sector, varies so widely by size, if we're able to define the comparator set that we want to deal with, then that would be an area that I'd recommend that you take a look at.
Sure. And the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, when that goes into effect in the very near future here, that's going to have an impact on our bottom line across the board, as many companies are looking at right now. So I guess, I hope we don't have this in a vacuum, and I feel like this is one of those big rocks that takes a lot of conversations and a lot of movement on. And to me, this is, at least I'm understanding it to be a very high-level start. And we say take a look at something. Is that going to, I hope that yields us some sort of a deliverable at the end of it, whether it be we decide to take no action, live with that consequence, or decide to take some action, live with that consequence. So, thank you.
Well, and essentially some of what you were suggesting is, if we do some analysis and we have, be a different analysis for doing clerical positions, we might look locally, but police officers, we're probably going to be needing to look at, well, not just Normal, but Decatur and Springfield.
Absolutely.
And different kind of comparison. Same thing with firefighters. So there are different types of workers that we're examining.
I mean, that's one of the hardest things with compensation, is making sure that you're getting the data, but then also making the appropriate comparisons for the position.
Right. And so I think that getting at some of what Jim or Scott were talking about, if we're talking to our constituents and we're seeing what perhaps their raise and benefits might be, certainly at Illinois Wesleyan. I think we've had 1% raises in, 8 years, Karen, something like that, and more money each year for healthcare. So I understand that part, but I'm not comparable perhaps to a police officer, right? So, I mean, in all kinds of ways. I'm not good, but I mean, that position, not me personally, but that position.
Right.
And the same thing with firefighters.
Right.
And so those two in particular are groups that we would be competing with other jurisdictions
Right.
rather than clerical staff, support staff in other ways.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yep. And the other thing you kind of have to factor in too is how tight the labor market is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think people are getting thousands of applications for police officers.
Yeah, we're not.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is also one of the factors that makes this difficult. I talk a little bit later in the slides about types of comparisons we can make to the external market. One of those would be a lag strategy where you're behind the market. Last year, Bloomington Normal had the lowest unemployment rate in the state. We can't do that. We can't do a lag strategy because you don't have the labor market available to come into open positions. So it's, again, making the right comparisons, and there probably will be different comparisons for different types of positions. Absolutely.
Alderman Millwall.
No, thank you. I'm glad we're talking about comparisons because this is something that I've mentioned in the past, and it is true that there are some things that are not necessarily comparable. You know, I mean, you're talking about a police officer. How do you compare that to somebody else in the private sector? I'm not sure. So I think comparisons are good to inform us, but generally I do think we are ultimately going to be judged on our ability to recruit and retain, because the public will also expect the organization to be able to perform and do a good job and perform the services that they're expecting them to. And I, this also reminds me that in the last, I want to say last 4 or 5 years, the municipality has been undergoing some sort of renewal, as we've seen more retirements.
Mm-hmm.
And the city manager has been in a position to recruit other individuals to join the municipality, and I remember him commenting on the fact that he's getting different types of employees, who bring in different capabilities. So and when I say different capabilities, I'm talking about in a positive way. So what's the balance? Where would we have been able to do that if we had lower benefits? I'm not quite sure. And I think that's a strategic decision that we'll have to make down the line.
Yeah, I agree.
Anybody else? Any other comments?
All right, let me get to the back end.
Okay, Dr.
Which is
Lust,
the
continue.
hard end. All right, internal fairness is pretty easy. We can handle that. Individual, that's pretty easy. Here's the hard part, the competitive part. The problem with these kinds of external comparisons is there's so many of them, right? Do we have a benefit or not? What levels do we have with benefits? Who pays for it? What's the eligibility? Who's going to be covered? In fact, one of the things, I should have mentioned this in the slide, nationally for cost of health care for individual plans, for state and local governments, it's about 90-10. The governmental entity pays 90% of the premium. Individual employees pay 10. For families, it's about 70-30. the governmental sector pays 70, employees pay 30. That's not the case for a private sector. It's more like 75-25 or maybe even pushing 80-20. So even on these very specific items, we see some differences between public and private sector. Do benefits change? So the two questions I think you're going to have to ask is, where do you want to be relative to the market, and who's the market? And unfortunately, there's no, we got a lot of markets. So I did just want to mention this briefly. Typically we think in terms of 3 or 4 possibilities. Leading the market. In a pay context, that means you're ahead of the market the entire year. What happens is people are going to give raises tomorrow, people are going to give raises next week. The market, maybe not so much, but the market is constantly changing. So if one does a true lead strategy, you position yourself far enough ahead of the market that by the end of the year, you're still ahead. Not everybody can do that, right? Again, we go back to ability to pay. A match strategy or lead lag, we position ourselves ahead for a bit, recognizing that eventually we're going to fall a little bit behind, but it's typically not far enough that it's going to have an impact on employee actions. And then a lag, as we mentioned before, you're behind for the entire year. I would caution that you need to be sure that you can hire employees if you do that. Typically, firms are not able to use a true lag strategy, even though it does save money, because you're not able to get the level of employment that you need. So I think you're probably going to have a discussion about where you want to be in those choices. Obviously, the decisions do come down to ability to pay, what kind of trade-offs are we making with roads and all those other things. But then the other big question is, who's the market and how do we tap into it? As we referred to already, size is really important, union status is really important. Industry, I think it's okay to mix public and private. Geography, it kind of depends what you're looking at, but I think you can probably stay either Illinois for the municipal or stay local for some of the public or private sector. It is not easy to do surveys of benefits because there are so many things that you can look at. The survey ends up potentially being very large for the folks who fill the survey out, and it is very, very difficult for the individuals who are compiling the data to pull together the types of differences that are there. Again, our survey was just members of Bloomington Normal Human Resource Council, which was the big firms. But even at that, with pretty good agreement on what we were going to do, after the surveys came in, it took me about 3 months to pull everything together there. So you want to be very clear with the market, and you also want to be very clear with what issues are important to you that you want to ask about in a survey. Okay, do you want to be concerned with just what benefits are offered? Do you want to be concerned with levels? Do you want to be concerned with the cost structure? The more complicated you make it, the more difficult it is for folks to fill the survey out, but then also the more difficult it is to compile the data and feed it back. Okay, so I would argue for being as comprehensive as one can, but you have to recognize there's going to be some trade-offs in there too. Final thing you have to be a little bit careful with, everybody's got multiple health plans, right? We've got multiple, at ISU, we've got multiple health plans, we've got multiple retirement plans, vacation days vary. So it makes it very difficult to ask an employer, give us your one plan, because most people don't have one plan. They've got a kabillion of them. Okay, so that also makes things a little bit more difficult. I did want to mention this because the big lawsuit in the area finally got settled. This is kind of a hot button issue with the Justice Department. Okay, they are very much concerned with wage collusion. There was a suit, Todd versus Exxon, that focused on a number of the major oil industries that went from 1997 to 2010 and was finally settled out of court for multi-million dollars. So a lot of lawyers got rich on that one, but it does give one a sense of the sensitive nature of looking at these kinds of issues. So the guidelines that I put in here were guidelines that we used for, when I was doing the local HR council survey, and they were guidelines that came from a number of different corporate lawyers in town, and I would recommend that these are things you think about doing. You got to do aggregate data. You can't break it out by firm. You can't report State Farm does this, Heritage does this, Town and Normal does this. It's got to be aggregate. You can break it out by sector, but you can't identify individual firms. That's a absolute hot button with the feds. So I would be careful there. They also recommend that it goes to somebody who's not going to be a user of the survey. That was why I did the local survey. I worked for 2 years in our Office of HR as a special projects consultant, but basically I wasn't doing anything with the wage data. So you do kind of want to have somebody independent from you all, I think, who sees that raw data, or else you're raising some potential issues. You don't want to report anything with less than 3 individual companies. That was the same thing we did with the employment, or with the survey that we did. If we had less than 3 employees responding, we grouped it with other data. So that's kind of a norm. 3 to 5, it seems to be the cut point there, but you want to make sure that you're not able to identify individual groups. These last 2, basically, you can't get into future things. You can't say, are you thinking about adding another benefit, or what kind of raise are you thinking about doing? Because that just absolutely suggests the potential for collusion to occur. Okay, so my point is, you've got to have data. I think you've got to have the ability to make these comparisons, but you also, I think, need to be a little wary of doing things the right way so there's not problems. So down the line, I think you want to figure out if you're going to do it, who's going to do it, when you're going to do it. If it's an outside firm, what are you looking at? And then what can you do to make sure people fill it out? I mean, how many surveys come in every week? A zillion. I mean, so there's no benefit for HR people to fill out yet another wage and benefit survey. Now, obviously, typically, one would provide the information back, so that would provide an incentive, but if it's not going to be a good comparison for a firm, even that's not necessarily good incentive. So getting people to do it is not always the easiest thing in the world. Again, I was lucky because I was working with HR council members who said they would do it, and not everybody did it all the time. So even there, it was a little bit of a different dynamic. So I applaud you for thinking about these issues. It's going to make your head hurt. This is not an easy or clear way to go. So.
Thank you, Dr. Lust. Questions, comments? Start with Alderman Fruin.
Sure. Very good discussion. It just goes to show you the simplistic look and the complicated look and the comprehensiveness of this. And primarily, in my opinion, this kind of started out more of a healthcare situation than everything else we've talked about. And I think healthcare benefits are easy to compare apples and apples. I would say that between our employers up here, the employers of our spouses, if you go out to our department heads, I think there's enough contacts with top 20 employers in town that would be very easy to obtain the generalized health care benefits. I know you mentioned several plans, cafeteria plans. And I think what we hear is, well, the mayor alluded to it a couple minutes ago, what kind of salary increases his employer has provided over the last 8 years. But I think there's apples and apples out there, and that's what we hear about. We hear about, what's your deductible? Well, I can tell you tonight, mine's $1,500. What's your copay? What's your out-of-pocket? What's your, and on and on and on. And I think quite often people are saying, well, that's a pretty rich benefit that you have. We provide coverage for spouses of employees. Those spouses are eligible for their own coverage from their own employers, but yet we're footing that bill, or 75% of it, or 50% of it, 50% of it. I think there's some steps as a council that we can take without a full-blown 6-month comprehensive survey based on our knowledge of other employers in the community. So I'm not sure where our council's going to go, Mayor, but I'll say what I said earlier. From what I'm hearing, there's a growing disparity between private and public benefits. The taxpayer is the one that's paying the bill for what we're providing our employees. Thank you.
Dr. Lustway, just in reference to that, is there any sort of, well, hazards or pitfalls, limitations that you would see if we are only looking at healthcare? And obviously it's tough to find even healthcare, because there could be, as you've mentioned and Jim alluded to, many options that you could buy.
It's one benefit. So it is the most expensive benefit. I don't know, though, that I would limit myself. You might start with healthcare, but I don't know that I would just stop with healthcare, because certainly there's a range of things. Time off, that probably could and should be analyzed too. So I think I would urge that you think in more of a broader total comp environment and look at the range of possibilities that you're dealing with, instead of just only one benefit. I mean, the first question would be, is that benefit truly out of line? I mean, in terms of costs and those types of things. I don't know. I mean, I purposely have not asked about the benefit structure, so I don't have any idea what was being provided. But I think I would want to see some comparisons to make sure that even if it is that one issue, that it is truly out of line.
And then, of course, we've also got the issue that we have non-union employees and 11 collective bargaining units, and so that winds up being another issue for us as we
Right,
go
absolutely.
forward. But certainly getting the data and information up front,
Right.
with all its limitations, you would suggest would probably be a good idea for us.
Right.
Other comments, questions? Well, seeing none, again, Dr. Luss, thank you very
Mayor,
much.
could I
yeah,
just
sure.
ask a couple of more questions? This is, I think, been one of the most difficult questions, and I've never, and all the people I ask, never get a clear answer, and maybe there is no answer, but let's just take police and fire, for example, because one of the areas is those two particular pension funds where we have some very high unfunded public or pension liabilities.
Right.
And of course, just what we post in our financial statements, I think collectively they're up around $30 million. So we're kind of 50% funded. when you do a survey like that, you know, and if you look at, well, City of Bloomington, here's our pay and benefits, but we're only 50% funded, sooner or later, the organization's going to have to come up with a lot of money
Yeah,
to
that cost
pay
is gonna
what
be there.
should have been collected in years past. And
Right.
if you compare to another city that is 100% funded,
Right.
and they're not facing that same cost, how do you take something like that into account in an
Well,
external
it-
survey?
You would have to have a broad enough survey and a broad enough grouping. Uh, Private sector is going to be much more constrained there. I mean, they're going to have actuarial targets that they've got to meet and minimum funding levels. So typically, you're not going to see as much possibility for underfunding as we do see in the public sector. Um, Again, if you're gathering information, put a question in, what level are you funded, or do you feel you have a problem of underfunding? So you could do that via survey, but I think on that issue in particular, I don't know that I'd be real concerned about private sector.
Mhm. And how about another question? This has to do more with this issue of pensions, because I think what we've been seeing that nationally, the private sector has got out of the defined benefit sort of retirement plans for a much more stable, hopefully a much more cost-efficient defined contribution.
Right.
Public sectors
Public
has
sector
not. It's
hasn't.
still very high. So as you try to make a public sector, private sector comparison, do you see that you know, that is going to give our private sector comparisons certainly much more of a lower compensation advantage? Because that one component, you know, has certainly
It
been...
will shift the, I did see it in here, and I apologize for not having the number off the top of my head, but I want to say the amount spent in public sector for pensions is double the proportion that it is in the private sector. So if ours was, I think it was about 11%, I think it's either 5.5 or 6.5% in the private sector. And that has been because of the shift over the last 30 years towards a defined contribution plan, which is based on how much money's put in and what it grows to. It doesn't give a guaranteed benefit at the end like a defined benefit would. Right.
And yet we can't just, you know, state that, well, that one component is going to mean that the private sector total comp is going to be lower than the public sector. Because again, it's just one component.
Yeah, it's one
How
component.
does bonuses, how does incentives,
Right.
anything else? And again, maybe they don't add enough
Right.
to change that who's higher, who's lower.
And even there, again, remember, all it does is shift the emphasis off of benefits onto pay. So, right.
Okay. And one last thing on this survey that Dr. Luss did here locally. I think one thing to keep in mind, most of that was on wage type jobs.
Yeah.
It did not get into salaried type people.
Right.
And unfortunately, when you get into the insurance industry around here and things like that, there was, and because we do have, you know, salaried employees too, that got to keep in mind, was it because that was more difficult to obtain?
No,
or
that
was that
was
excluded?
That was a clear decision by the council. We identified, I think it was 46 different jobs, but they wanted to focus just on the hourly side of it because typically there were going to be multiple people in the position. There was a concern that if we went with salary positions, very quickly you'd be getting only one or two folks at a given firm in a given job, and then that way we wouldn't be able to use that in the comparisons. So that was a very explicit decision and a vote by council to focus just on wage positions and then on the benefit piece of it. But even with the benefits, we'd say, give us your vacation setup. And we don't have vacation setup. It's all PTO. People can take it however they want, or which vacation do you want? For 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20. So I'd get back in 6 different vacation plans going through it. So it didn't bother me to not do salary, but it wasn't because of my convenience. It was the council just wanted to focus on the wage positions because that was where we felt like there was more local competition.
And one last comment, and maybe I think it's important for the council to understand the city has in past years done external comp surveys, but they've been limited, and usually they've been done by the Hay Group out of Chicago.
Sure.
So a lot of their data, which doesn't have names of companies, is probably been made up a lot more of the Chicago big MSA or that area. And anytime we've asked the Hay Group is, well, can you get us data for, say, down here in central Illinois? And unfortunately, they could not. Lori, is this correct? Hay Group really didn't have kind of segregated data for just central Illinois, Bloomington, Peoria, Champaign. Yeah. So I think that's important to point out. It was until we heard that Dr. Luss, through that Bloomington Normal Human Resources Coalition, used to do that. That's the first time we heard of anything locally. And even though they've discontinued it, we could always approach other cities and other private companies, see would they like to resurrect that, so that one, if there is a need or a desire to have that, we spread the cost around and we start gathering that local data. But I will say this too, even as we do that, I think what we have found just in the hiring and the external marketing, it might be helpful to broaden that out a little bit to the Peorias and the Champaign and Springfield, because nowadays people are commuting, without a hesitation sometimes, 20, 30 miles. So maybe a central Illinois survey.
Generally, even for local comparisons, I would call that whatever's an easy commute, which is going to be, for some people, that's 45 minutes. For some people, it's 75 minutes. Am I going to commute from Chicago here? Probably not. But, you could get into a central Illinois pretty easily.
Well, you'd have five MSAs, and we're the only one within an hour of the others.
Mm-hmm.
So they certainly, if we do Champaign-Urbana, Decatur, Springfield, Peoria, and us. And so I suppose that's in terms of next steps. It sounded like, in spite of the, we're going to get imperfect data because there's no such thing as perfect data, understanding some of the limitations of what we'll get. But is there consensus on the council as a next step then for us to try to get some information, perhaps from Central Illinois metropolitan areas, the 5 central, MSAs? And if so, we know we'd separate some of that police, fire, with, so we're doing apples and apples, and then maybe some other kinds of specifics. Is that something that you think might be of value to us? Obviously, it's not going to be determined.
I think it would be of value. Doability, who knows?
And the cost.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, not doing the state of Illinois is going to be much more cost-effective to stay within an hour, sure, absolutely.
Right, okay. So I guess then, is there any objection to at least having the city manager take a look at or talk to some firms, maybe even some we've dealt with, and to say this is what we're interested in, what can you do for us, and roughly what would the cost be?
I'd like to see a proposal for that.
Pardon me?
I'd like to see a proposal or proposals to see what.
Okay.
What
Well, and I think that's what we're saying. We're not approving anything. It's just saying, yes, city manager, we are interested in gathering some kind of information. We'd also like to see what the costs obviously would be of this, and we certainly understand, the limitations. Certainly appreciate your helping us kind of keep our methodological antennae up for the things that we need to be aware of as we go forward. Alderman Lauer.
Just a question, will this include some private sector information as well, or are we just
Oh,
looking?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry, I wasn't clear, I apologize. I was saying, if we're doing something like police and fire, that's probably going to be municipal
Obviously,
comparisons.
right, but
And
we
then
have
the others,
bulk of
we
our-
would be looking at private sector comparisons,
Correct.
certainly for clerical staff or other things. Absolutely, yeah. Okay. And so,
Mayor, if I could just, would also like to bring back a proposal on next steps on a parallel track of only moving towards adopting some sort of comprehensive employee compensation strategy going forward. If there's anything that I think is, I think not cost effective for the staff and I, is every 2 to 3 years kind of go back and try to recreate or establish what is our strategic plan, our policy going forward. That takes a lot of extra time and effort. So I think now granted, you got to keep in mind it's going to take some time, and it could take a while because each of these steps along the way could get into their own discussion and debate, and ultimately where's the majority on, who is our market and things of that nature. But I do think that would be worthwhile, at least to lay out a process and give you some more update and see if it's something you would be interested to, in addition to the survey data going forward on a regular
yeah, I think we will look forward to hearing from you. Again, Dr. Luss, thank you
You
so
could
much.
do that, you could do that with a task force.
Mhm.
Start with a small group, look at options, and then bring it to a larger group.
And then go from there.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we certainly have had some experiences lately on task forces too. So anyway, Dr. Luss, thank you very, very much. Very much appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
problem.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was there another? Oh, okay. So thank you so much. At this point, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderwoman
Second.
Schmidt, second by Alderman Milwaukee. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you again, Dr. Luss.
Well, very, very nice. I'm Steve Rasmus, the assistant manager. Very nice.